A dark tunnel under a pyramid in Mexico where human sacrifices took place. A shrine dedicated to the goddess of witchcraft and the underworld where visitors would communicate with the dead. And a sun temple where humans and llamas were sacrificed. These are terrifying ancient temples that were built for dark rituals. In 2003, a major find was made under the Feathered Serpent Pyramid in Teotihuacan, Mexico. After a sinkhole opened up near the pyramid, archaeologist Sergio Gomez Chavez and his team discovered a tunnel that had been sealed for over 1800 years, and inside they found all kinds of offerings: crocodile teeth, jaguar statues, and crystals shaped like eyes. But the weirdest find was a model of mountains with pools of liquid mercury to represent the lakes. The walls were covered in pyrite, which would have made the place look like it was sparkling under the bright light. See, Teotihuacan was built to represent the three layers of the universe: the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. This tunnel was made to represent the dark, watery underworld, the place where life and death intersected. People would have gathered here for ceremonies, believing they were connecting with the gods through these rituals, and while that sounds pretty interesting, it wasn't just symbolic. In the 80s, archaeologists found over 100 warriors kneeling with their hands bound, likely sacrificed as part of one of these ceremonies. On top of that, animals like wolves, rattlesnakes, and eagles were also sacrificed here. The Inca Temple of the Sun, found in the heart of Cusco, Peru, was one of the most sacred sites in the Inca Empire. It was dedicated to Inti, the sun god, who they believed controlled life itself. The temple was filled with gold and precious stones. It would have been a true sight to behold in its heyday, but if you're one of those people who really loves llamas, you may want to cover your ears. So many of these poor silly animals were slaughtered here. The Incas practiced a ritual known as capacocha, which involved human sacrifices, often very young humans, to please the gods and ensure balance in the world. These sacrifices were done during important times like the December solstice, when the Inca believed they needed to appease the gods to prevent disasters or just bring good fortune. The victims were picked for how seemingly pure and perfect they were perceived to be. They'd be whisked away from their parents, taken to the mountaintops and shrines where they'd be offered up to the gods by high priests. Sometimes they were given substances to make them appear as though they were peacefully going to the stars. Sometimes they'd be left out to freeze, other times they'd be taken out more efficiently. And as I said before, thousands of llamas were also sacrificed as part of the ritual, and their BLOOD would be carefully collected and spread across the empire in tiny clay jars. The Incas believed that these offerings kept the sun strong and ensured the cycle of time would continue without a hitch. The Temple of Hecy in Turkey was dedicated to the goddess of Hecate, who is associated with a lot of things, and pretty much all of them were spooky. She was the goddess of the night, magic, witchcraft, necromancy, ghosts, and crossroads. Her temple was seen as that thin veil between realms. Pretty cool, but you can imagine some of the creepier rituals that would have happened in a place like this. Often it was a place to try and communicate with the dead. Inside there were altars where people made offerings like food, incense, and sometimes animals, all in hopes of gaining Hecate's favor or power. But rituals like this weren't just for worshipping Hecate, they were often about controlling or communicating with the supernatural. Again, this was seen as a place where that line between the living and the dead was thin. Hecate was thought to have the power to open the gates to the underworld, which made the temple a kind of portal to the dark side of the ancient world. The Temple of Kukulkan, also known as El Castillo, is a very famous landmark, a massive pyramid in Chichen Itza, Mexico, built by the Mayans. It was dedicated to Kukulkan, the feathered serpent god, who is said to connect the heavens and the earth. The design of the pyramid itself is crazy in terms of how it lines up with the sun. Twice a year during the equinoxes, the sunlight creates the illusion of a serpent crawling down the steps. But aside from how breathtaking it looks, this place was also the site of some very dark rituals. As many of you probably know, the Mayans did a fair bit of human sacrificing, and El Castillo was one of the prime spots for these ceremonies. Victims, usually prisoners of war, were either thrown down the steps or sacrificed at the top. These rituals were done for a number of reasons, but mainly to appease the gods in exchange for good things like rain and healthy harvests. The Mayans also saw this as a necessary way to balance life and death. When they made these sacrifices, they believed believed they were keeping the gods happy and the universe in check. The Hellfire Caves in Buckinghamshire, England are anything but ordinary. What looks like a simple church and mausoleum hides this massive underground complex of tunnels and chambers. These were dug out by Sir Francis Dashwood, an 18th century man with wealth, power, and a bit of a dark reputation. Dashwood expanded the caves under his property to create this secret hideout for his infamous Hellfire Club. This club was known for its scandalous behavior and secretive meetings. Members supposedly took part in some pretty bizarre and possibly disturbing rituals, and there have always been stories about human sacrifices as well. One Hellfire Club member, Paul Whitehead, allegedly burned all the club's records before he died, so we'll never really know the full story, what went on down there. Today the caves are open for tours, but considering the stories surrounding them, you probably wouldn't want to spend the night alone down there. I bet some of you might be curious enough to give it a shot though. In 1991, aerial photographers near Berlin spotted something strange, an ancient structure that came to be known as the German Stonehenge. The site consists of 7 rings made of banks and ditches with post holes where wooden poles would have once stood. First it seemed like just another interesting archaeological discovery, but then archaeologists started digging. When they reached the oldest layer dating back to around 2200 BCE, they found pottery, animal bones, and stone tools, but the creepiest finds were all the human remains, all of them women and youths, and it was clear these people didn't die of natural causes. They'd obviously died violently, and their bodies had just been tossed into their graves without any care. Then things got even weirder. Nearby they found the remains of 13 men who'd been buried with a lot more respect. No signs of trauma, just peaceful burials. It seemed the men had been honored in death while the others were just sacrificed, or at least tossed aside. Why they were killed is still a mystery, but it looks like this site could have been used for some kind of brutal ritual. Corbin Castle in Romania has a completely different but equally terrifying vibe. This castle is notorious for being the home of Vlad the Impaler, the man who is of course the inspiration for Dracula. Vlad was known for his extreme cruelty, to put it lightly, and Corbin Castle was a perfect setting for all of it. I mean, just look at this place. Has there ever been a castle more classically ominous looking than this? Even if you didn't know the history behind it, one look, you'd probably just assume there was a vampire lurking in it. This is also timely because the 2024 Nosferatu remake was filmed here. The place is built like a fortress with thick walls, high towers, and supposedly there are also creepy secret passageways. Vlad wasn't shy about using torment to maintain control. He'd impale his enemies in the most brutal of ways, leaving their bodies on display as a warning. But there's more to the dark history of the castle. It's said that Vlad may have also practiced occult rituals or used dark magic to increase his power and strike fear into people, and this castle is the place where all of it was said to have happened, and I wouldn't be surprised. With all the mystery and wonder that surrounds ancient Egypt, you'd think there would have been some disturbing rituals going on in the pyramids or tombs or close to their massive larger-than-life statues. There's a common misconception that the ancient Egyptians were just sacrificing people left and right, but in reality they didn't really practice much human sacrifice. There were rare cases though. In ancient Egypt, the afterlife wasn't just this vague idea, it was everything. To the Egyptians, death was part of the journey, and the transition into the afterlife was a sacred, often terrifying event. But here's the thing, when someone important like a pharaoh or a high-ranking official passed away, it wasn't just them that would go. Not always. For some, it meant a one-way ticket to the afterlife for them too. So you're a servant to the pharaoh and you find out that he's died. It's sad, but then you're told you not only have to show up at his funeral, you also have to travel to the afterlife with him. Yep, they were so important that they needed you in the afterlife. Can't show up on the other side without any servants to handle your business, right? Now, while today this sounds pretty horrifying, back then it was seen as an honor and a privilege. The idea was that your loyalty in life carried over into the afterlife. This ritual, known as retainer's sacrifice, was meant to ensure the pharaoh's smooth transition into the other side. It also sometimes includes soldiers and the pharaoh's pets. And just because human sacrifice sacrifice wasn't as common in ancient Egypt doesn't mean there weren't other violent rituals. Archaeologists have come across a number of severed hands in ancient Egyptian tombs, and it's believed that these severed hands were actually war trophies. Back then, it wasn't uncommon for victorious warriors to collect grisly souvenirs from their victories, and that's all over the world, really. A lot of historians think that these hands in particular were ritually severed as a part of a ceremony, possibly as a way of touting their defeat and domination of the enemy. But why hands specifically? Well, the symbolism is actually pretty obvious here. Even though their enemy would most likely be killed, they were stripping them of their power and agency even in the afterlife. Remember, the ancient Egyptians saw the afterlife as a continuation, not an end. So going into the afterlife handless would be a significant disadvantage. Where do temples come into play here though? Well, in one case, a whole bunch of severed hand trophies were discovered in pits during excavations of a palace near the ancient city of Avaris. These pits contained hundreds of severed hands neatly stacked together, and the largest pit was right in front of the throne room. Well, with all of that said, I've been your host James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.